Wow!
Hello and welcome. I'm Sarah Pate, Director of the Washington Center for the Book, an affiliate of the Library of Congress Center for the Book, administered by Washington State Library, where I'm a librarian. The Centers for the Book help carry out the mission of the National Center, which is to promote books, reading, libraries, and literacy nationwide. We also promote our state's literary heritage by putting a focus on books and authors with a connection to our states. Every year, as part of our participation in the Library of Congress National Book Festival's Roadmap to Reading, we each choose books with local connections to represent our states. This is part of the Great Reads from Great Places initiative. Today, we are speaking with Great Reads authors from several states. They were invited by the affiliate centers for the book of Alaska, Hawaii, Idaho, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington. It's my great pleasure to introduce today's authors to you, alphabetically by the name of the state they are representing today. Representing Alaska, Sibulik, ancestor. Lily Tisroy-Luke is an Indigenous writer from Alaska and Canada, an enrolled member of the native village of Point Hope and Nisga'a Nation. Her debut novel, Sibulik, Ancestor, is an Indigenous story where a mother and her children survived smallpox and now face the violent exploitation of the American whaling industry. Representing Hawaii, Island Wisdom. Kainoa Daines is currently the Senior Director of Brand for the Hawaii Visitors and Convention Bureau. He's also passionate about genealogy, Hawaiian monarchical history, and his little girl who turns 4 in July. Annie Daly is a freelance journalist based in New York and the co-author of Island Wisdom with Kainoa Daines. Her first book, Destination Wellness, is about different well-being practices and philosophies around the world. She's also a former editor at Self, Cosmo, BuzzFeed Travel, Yahoo Travel, and Good Housekeeping, and she writes for many national publications, including Marie Claire, Vogue, Cosmo, and more. Representing Idaho, the Beadworkers. Beth Piatote, Associate Professor of English and Comparative Literature at the University of California, Berkeley, is a Nez Perce fiction writer, playwright, scholar, and Indigenous language activist. Her acclaimed mixed genre collection, The Beadworkers Stories, is set in Nez Perce homelands that include beautiful present-day Idaho. Representing Nevada, Chasing Giants, in search of the world's largest freshwater fish. Zeb Hogan is a research biologist at the University of Nevada, Reno. Hogan also hosts National Geographic's television series, Monsterfish. His research focuses on migratory fish ecology, fisheries management, and endangered species issues. Representing Oregon, The Day I Die, the untold story of assisted dying in America. Anita Honig is an author and anthropologist whose work explores the cultural dimensions of medicine, especially birth and death. In recent years, Anita has emerged as a leading voice on death literacy in America. And her writing has appeared in Cognoscenti, Undark Magazine, and the Seattle Times, among others. And finally, representing Washington, We Hear by Reviews, Japanese American Resistance to Wartime Incarceration. Frank Abe is a filmmaker and lead author of We Hear by Reviews. His biography of the novelist John Okada won an American Book Award, and his new anthology of the literature of Japanese American incarceration is coming from Penguin Classics in May 2024. Tamiko Nimura is an Asian American creative nonfiction writer and public historian from Tacoma, Washington. She's co-author of We Hear by Reviews and is working on a memoir about the legacy of her family's wartime incarceration. Ross Ishikawa is a former architect, currently working as an animator in Seattle. In addition to his work on We Hear by Reviews, he is working on a graphic novel about his parents and their coming of age during World War II. His work is online at rossishikawa.com. Thank you all so much for your incredible books and for being here with us today to speak about them. My first question, can you share with us what inspired you to write your book? Why was it important to you to tell this story?
For the invitation. I am so honored to be here. And my book, Sibulik Ancestor, is inspired by my people of Point Hope, or traditionally called Tikek. I grew up with this saying about my home: Tikek is the oldest continuously living settlement in America. I've heard it said in our stories, books, documentaries, government reports, etc. And I can distinctly picture my elders and tribal leaders saying, Tikek is the oldest continuously living settlement in America. What does that mean? It means that we migrated to Tikigaq 10,000 years ago, and we continue to have a modern settlement there today. And currently, there are a number of whaling captains that still practice subsistence whaling. We just had our whaling feast, and there's so much that the whaling captains, tribal leaders, whaling captain crews that have inspired me to continue these stories, continue our narratives in the global community. Inupiaq people of Tikigaq, we have a unique perspective of the world, and I am hoping that my book Savuluk will give a new perspective in viewing the Arctic, especially in this and today's climate. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lily. Kainoa?
Aloha mai kako. Mahalo for having me today to be able to represent Hawaii, the once independent kingdom out here in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Originally, I said no for 3 months. I did not want to write this book because it felt, to the Hawaiian word maha'oi, or nosy, to put out our knowledge, our ike, our information to a much larger audience than I wanted to. And till I realized that I could become, Annie and I could become funnels for information to help people better understand Hawaii. The book is written for 2 audiences. The first are Kama'aina, or local people that live here in the islands, as a reminder of who we are as a people. As more and more people move to these islands, it's changing Hawaii. And we'd rather Hawaii change you than you change Hawaii. And so that's the first audience. The second audience were those that were interested in learning more about it by visiting, coming to Hawaii on vacation, as Hawaii is one of the top vacation destinations in the world. And my day job at the Hawaii Visitors and Convention Bureau, it made sense to be able to, I do it for a living. That's how I met Annie, my co-author, who's a travel writer. And so the 2 of us were able to sit down and put together something that I feel very confident and comfortable that we're reaching out to people to say, this is our home, not your playground. To welcome, you're welcome to my home. Come to Hawaii, but when you come to my house, you leave your shoes off outside. But when you come inside, enjoy and relax. That metaphor for the book was kind of that same thing. So I realized we could be that funnel and sort of reclaim our narrative here in Hawaii to a much larger audience. I said, absolutely. So interviewed 20 very dear friends of mine who are Hawaiian practitioners of hula, farming, language, etc., and asked them all 2 questions. What does aloha mean to you? And what is one lesson Hawaii can teach the rest of the world? And those 2 questions pretty much wrote the book itself. So we're able to sort of share this ike, this knowledge with the rest of the world in a very sort of palatable, digestible way for everyone to better understand who we are. So I'm happy to have finally said yes.
So Island Wisdom actually came as a result of my first book, Destination Wellness. And Destination Wellness is about different healthy living practices and philosophies from around the world. And one of the chapters was devoted to Hawaii, and specifically the beautiful spirit of aloha. And basically my editor at my publishing house really, really loved that chapter and wanted to turn it into a full book. And so that's sort of where it began. But then I think the timing of it just worked out so well, because as Kainoa and I decided to write this book together, over-tourism in Hawaii was just becoming a really, really big problem. Like, it had always been a problem, but then with COVID, it really just elevated like so tremendously. And so we kind of started to see this book not only as a way for the world to understand Hawaiian culture at large, but also as a way for travelers in particular to know how to respect the culture when they visit. And so it was really, really wonderful timing, because it sort of started as one thing and then it morphed into a beautiful sort of like epic, book about how to behave as a traveler in the world.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure for my book to be selected and to be part of this conversation. It's really an honor. So I'm a short story writer, a fiction writer. And so the book started by I was writing stories. And I was interested in writing stories about Nez Perce and other Native people and stories that show our connections with our language, with our land, with each other, our mobility, our, different ways of moving through the world. And the first story that I wrote that, got this collection going was called Beading Lesson. And it's a setting where a young woman is learning beadwork from her auntie. And the story was really based on my experience with my own auntie, who was a master beadworker. And as I continued to write stories, I kept seeing this theme of beadwork re-emerging. And this started to become the structure of the book, is to show this quiet labor of doing beadwork and the ways that, the community holds itself together, and sort of like the behind the scenes structures of cultural continuity and support and love and artistry that goes into, sustaining a community across time. And so then so somehow the stories kept having people doing beadwork and beadworkers appearing in and out. And then the book actually became something like a beadwork table itself. I started to think of the collection as a place where people could come and be together, that it's a place where, stories circulate and where you can laugh about your, tragic love stories or whatever. And that it would be a place where especially Native people could come to this book and gather and see these stories and pass them around and feel connected. So I really wrote this book thinking about Indigenous people and wanting other Native people to come to this book and not feel lonely, to feel connected, to recognize the characters and the experiences, and to pick up and move these stories together. And I know that for myself, it was also kind of a way for me to connect to my homelands and to other Indigenous people when I was, far away in California. So I think these are all the connective tissues that brought this diverse collection together around beadwork.
Thank you. Zeb.
Hi, thank you very much. Very happy to be with you all. Very proud to represent Nevada. I wrote Chasing Giants with a co-author, Stefan Lovgren. We had been working on news stories and television programs for a long time about the world's largest freshwater fish. And so ultimately we decided to write this book. We felt like it was a story that hadn't been told before. And we started with a fundamental question, which is, what is the world's largest freshwater fish? And surprisingly, we don't have the answer, or we didn't have the answer to that question, which sort of shows our lack of knowledge and appreciation about these amazing creatures. And so we spent 10 years traveling around the world and gathering stories. The search is actually a way to present information about these extraordinary creatures, freshwater fish that get over 6 feet long, weigh more than 200 pounds, have incredible importance to people all over the world for food as part of their culture. And so ultimately we wanted to highlight the important connection between people, rivers, lakes, and these extraordinary creatures. Thank you.
Thank you, Zeb. Anita.
Hi, thanks so much for including The Day I Die in this illustrious lineup. I'm so happy to be here. Well, let me back up. So in 1997, Oregon actually became the first state to enact an assisted dying law in the United States, which means that it enabled terminally ill patients with a prognosis of less than 6 months to live to determine the end of their lives by drinking illegal medication prescribed by their physician. And Oregon was actually for 10 years the only state that allowed assisted dying. Forward to now, and 22% of Americans live in states that have an assisted dying law. And yet nobody knows anything about these laws and how they work and why people choose to hasten the end of their life. So I started researching this book back in 2016 and really wanted to understand what drives ordinary Americans to go to extraordinary lengths to determine the end of their own lives. And I immersed myself in what I later realized was a niche death and dying community. So I became a hospice volunteer. I shadowed people who attend assisted deaths, planned deaths. I became friends with the physicians who prescribed the medication, and really was kind of a fly on the wall for 5 years of immersive reporting on this issue, and really wanted to unearth the personal narratives that get lost in the polarized national debate about whether or not people should have the right to decide when it's, or whether it's time to end their life. And what I found was just this remarkable candor and these amazing stories and these characters along the way that really dispelled a lot of my own preconceptions I had about death and dying, and preconceptions around it being always somber and sad. And of course, it can be all those things, but it can also be an uplifting and so meaningful occasion when that is kind of the final wish of someone. So my book basically talks about these stories behind this polarized national debate in an effort to bring death and dying closer to folks who haven't really thought about it, and to humanize the decisions of people who choose to hasten the end of their life.
The story of wartime incarceration is already one that is not entirely understood or widely taught. So inside that, there's another story of Japanese American resistance to incarceration that was actively suppressed by our own community for decades after the war. It's a part of our history that I first told in a documentary film 25 years ago, and we continue to tell that story with this book. What our book does is frame the context for 3 characters who comply with Army orders for forced removal from their homes after the attack on Pearl Harbor, but then they take different paths to refusing to submit to their ongoing imprisonment in American concentration camps without a fight. Jim Akutsu of Seattle refuses to be drafted from the camp until his rights as a free citizen are first restored. Hiroshi Kashiwagi refuses to sign a loyalty questionnaire. And then there's the story that's never been told before, the personal story of a woman named Mitsuye Endo, and how she reluctantly agreed to put her name to a lawsuit that reaches the Supreme Court and leads to the eventual closure of the camps. But the community, Japanese American community, shunned Jim and Hiroshi in particular, and their group, and distorted the memory of their acts of resistance because they didn't fit the public image of patriotism and loyalty that the community wanted to proffer. And that just made me want all the more to reframe and recenter their stories through this book, so that people could understand how they were not only standing for their rights as Americans by saying no, but how that really affects all Americans. It's important for democracy and the Constitution. What also inspired this book, Sarah, as a graphic novel, was the vision of the Wing-Luke Museum of Seattle to commission a series of 3 graphic novels on the wartime incarceration. The mission of the Wing-Luke is to connect audiences to Asian American history through what they call vivid storytelling. And they grasped the power of the graphic novel to bring together art and history for readers of all ages. So seeing the characters, I think, act through word and picture allows readers to immerse themselves in their personal stories, and that creates empathy. So this was a natural partnership. I was already on a path of developing the stories. The Wing-Luke put out a call for proposals for writers and artists, and the 4 of us answered that call.
I also thank everybody for inviting us and for being really including us in this lineup. I was inspired to join the team for We Hereby Refuse, partly because of the family roots of resistance in my past history. My grandfather was arrested from within barbed wire at Tule Lake, an American concentration camp in Northern California. And my uncle, Hiroshi Kashiwagi, who is a featured figure in We Hereby Refuse, he refused to answer 2 key questions on a so-called loyalty questionnaire. And these are the kinds of histories that were kept silent and unknown within the larger American history, but also within the Japanese American community. There's a lot of misinformation and a lot of misunderstanding about what it is to resist. And given that we had just experienced a large presidential election where the theme was resistance, it felt really urgent to join a project like this one.
Thank you. Roz?
Hi, thank you for including us in this presentation. This is an honor to be part of this. I joined We Hereby Refuse partly because my father had been in incarceration camps, but I had been pretty ignorant about the aspect of resistance to the camps until this project came along. And I was excited to bring the story to life. And the story of taking resistance and taking a stand during difficult times is, unfortunately, it became very relevant in 2016 when the call for artists of this project came around. So this project was a touchstone for me to channel my angst and energies to something productive over the next 4 years. And I really appreciated the opportunity.
Thank you. So our next question is, the National Book Festival's theme this year is Everyone Has a Story. What does that theme mean to you? And let's circle back to Lily.
Yes, I really like this this question of everyone, or this theme of everyone has a story, and it reminded me of when I decided to write this story. I was very lucky that I worked in tribal government. That was actually my first love. And until my son was diagnosed with autism and we had to move from rural Alaska to the city of Anchorage. But before that, I had a very important mentor and my great uncle, Rex Tazorlik. And I remember distinctly telling him that, well, I would like to write a book. I think it would be great to write an Inupiaq story with traditional knowledge in it. And I remember him being very quiet for a moment and then saying, well, there's been a lot of writers, historians, ethnographers that have written about Tikigaq. But none of them are from Tikigaq. And he just, I remember him sitting back and crossing his arms, and that was his way of teaching me to sit with that. And I think as Inupiaq people, as Indigenous peoples, we've been left out of our own history. And storytelling has been a means of reclaiming the narratives that have been made about ourselves. Under a colonial system, our traditional knowledge is not considered valid until a Western scientist studies the subject, secures a grant, writes a book, and under these colonial systems, we've been taught to doubt ourselves, to hate ourselves. The only good Indian is a dead Indian. Kill the Indian, save the man. No Indians or dogs allowed. No Eskimos or dogs allowed. All natives are drunks on 4th Avenue. And storytelling is the soul of a nation. Storytelling describes place, time, emotion, social conditions. And it's been a way for us as a people we've been able to portray our perspective of the universe. Thank you so much for the question, and I love this theme.
Thank you, Lily. Kainoa?
Yeah, mahalo again for that question. We all have a story indeed. And for me, the journey of writing, co-authoring Island Wisdom opened up for me a better understanding of who I am as an individual. My mother is part Hawaiian, Chinese, Welsh. My dad is from Wailuku, Maui. My dad is from Utah. And white guy, you know, love the man, but just, so I never quite figured out where I fit in between Hawaii and Utah, if you will. When I was in Hawaii, I never felt Hawaiian enough. When I was in Utah, I never felt the word haole enough, you know, or Caucasian enough. And so this journey for me to be able to figure out what is my story and who am I? And here I have this opportunity presented to me to be able to put onto paper. It was a really eye-opening experience for me to find that voice and then do that with 20 of my dearest friends as I interviewed them, and they were prepared to, you know, have their voices on a national stage as well. And that's been, I think, the challenge of Hawaii for such a long time, is our story has been told by someone else for far too long. And, you know, I saw this as an opportunity, small opportunity, but still the opportunity to be able to, again, as I said earlier, reclaim our narrative and sort of reset the dial about who we are as a people and as a place. So I love that we all are able to share our story through Island Wisdom, and all of us here today are able to share our collective stories, our native stories. Mahalo.
Slightly different for me, because I take that theme more from the perspective of a journalist. And what I mean by that is that I agree that everybody has a story, and I take it as my responsibility to really shine a spotlight on the stories that aren't told as often in the mainstream media. And so to me, when I hear that everybody has a story, what I hear is that it's my duty to elevate the people whose stories are, you know, often marginalized and not told in such a mainstream way. And I take that responsibility really seriously. And that's why I was so excited to be able to partner with Kainoa on writing this book, because, you know, to have this book written by a Native Hawaiian is so huge, because so much of the content that's written about Hawaii is usually not written by Hawaiians. And so that was really important to me.
I do love this theme, but I also think everyone has lots of stories. And so I think one of the gifts of being able to write short stories, or being able to have short stories circulate, is just the proliferation of stories. And Mimi Locke, the writer, talked about how important it is, especially for people of color. And we've already heard Kainoa and Lily talk about this, is that we have so many stories, and it's really important to get our stories out. And so short stories and personal stories, little stories that are circulating around, all of these are really important in terms of increasing our representation and our presence and our understanding of ourselves, and for intercultural understanding. I think stories have such incredible power to comfort, guide, and just amaze us. Stories are such a gift. And, you know, often in Native culture, stories are a form of advice giving. It's a direct form of guidance that may seem indirect, but it is actually just a very profound way to help someone, to give someone a story that then they can think about their own lives and extract the wisdom and the guidance that they need. And so stories are treated as very valuable gifts that we can share with each other. And so I also think we're all vessels of stories. We're all carrying stories of our families, of our ancestors, of our own personal stories. And this world of everyone has a story, or everyone has lots of stories, also applies to all of the living beings around us. So the river has a story, the land has a story, has lots of stories. And so we really need to learn to to be able to carry the stories of others, and that includes the birds and the waters and the world around us. And yeah, I love the focus on the significance of stories, and just think that it's the most powerful gift that we can share with each other is to give stories.
Thank you, Brad. Zeb?
Yeah, thank you for the question. In my case, it's a little bit different. It's not everyone has a story. Every fish has a story. As a fish biologist, I was writing about the fish and stories about an underwater world that we seldom get to see or learn about. And each of these fish has a story. I think a lot of these big fish, they're on the brink of extinction because of human activities. And so many of these fish have stories about how we could do better. For example, there are plenty of cases in North America. One case that comes to mind abroad is the Chinese paddlefish, which is the first one of these giant fish, fish that was found in the Yangtze River in China that could get over 20 feet long. Unique fish that unfortunately in 2020 was declared extinct. So one of these big fish that we've lost. And that's also happened in Nevada. We used to have runs of king salmon, believe it or not, in northern Nevada that we no longer have. Nevada used to be home to the world's largest minnow species that could get up to 6 feet long. That's now gone. So these fish have stories to tell us about how we can find a better balance between our needs and the needs of other creatures and aquatic life. Thank you.
Thank you. Anita?
So the people that are the subject of my book, when I stepped into their lives, they were at arguably one of their most vulnerable moments. And in some cases, some felt their most kind of disempowered moments. And they agreed to share their story because they wanted their experience, including their death, to mean more than it meant to them alone and their family. They wanted others to find inspiration or to find support in what they had been through, and to basically reach out in solidarity to those who were contemplating stopping treatment or looking into assisted dying, and yet they wouldn't have been able to anymore in this point of their life communicate this story and to anyone else. And so I was often really surprised to be invited into these very private, vulnerable moments, until I realized that people precisely kind of saw their story as a tool for activism, and as a tool for furthering understanding on a very misunderstood issue, and to also have that be part of their legacy. And all of the characters in the book no longer saw the book once it was published, because they had died, but their families had read it. And one of the readings I did in Pat Powell's in Portland, the daughters of one of the people I feature in the book sat right in the front row, and I know to them it was incredibly meaningful to have their mother honored in this way, and to have her legacy live on through these stories. And so I think that's what this theme means to me.
There are 125,000 stories here, persons who were forcibly removed from their homes and incarcerated for up to 4 years. And their stories cover the entire western region of the authors gathered here. 15 of the initial hometown concentration camps were located in Washington, Oregon, and especially California. One of the semi-permanent camps was in Idaho. The Army gave families a short window of time to voluntarily move inland off the West Coast, but the governor of Idaho refused to allow the Japanese to move into this state. And this move, ironically, forces the Army to requisition land in his state to build the Minidoka War Relocation Center near Twin Falls, Idaho. Hawaii. From Hawaii, the FBI arrested 800 or so Issei first-generation immigrants out of wartime fears, and as enemy aliens, so-called, sent them to Department of Justice internment camps in Montana, North Dakota, and New Mexico. And there's also an Alaskan story. In Alaska, nearly 900 indigenous people on the on the Aleutian Islands were also forcibly removed and imprisoned after Japanese troops seized 2 of the islands. And the army burned their homes to the ground rather than have them be used by the enemy. So 125,000 stories, that's the graphic scope of the Japanese American story.
I've been reading since I was a year and a half old, my parents tell me. And so I love the theme of everybody has a story, everybody has something to share. But really for me, the theme means everyone has a voice, and that voice might come in many forms. My uncle Hiroshi was an actor, an activist, a playwright, a poet, and he unfortunately died in 2019, excuse me. But he taught me that everyone has something to share and contribute and maybe even disrupt our larger story. And that's what I hope the theme will bring to other people as well.
Thank you. Ross?
Yes, I think relative to the book that we did, I think Everyone Tells a Story is, it was an interesting experience for me because it reminded me of the challenge of telling someone else's story and capturing the essence of their story. I was, one of our stories involved Jim Akutsu and his mother, Nao Akutsu, and I was the illustrator on this story. And then after the first draft, I did some draft drawings, and speaking with Frank, the author, it was clear that I had misinterpreted the character of Nao Akutsu, and I had her as kind of a shrinking violet in a particularly tense scene, and so Frank explained to me that she was actually very proud, and it changed the whole character of the scene to capture that her strength and her pride. Right now I'm doing the story about my parents, and it's like whenever you do these stories, you're just scratching the surface, and it's the real challenge is to capture them and tell what's important, because it's also kind of a danger to put someone into a box once their story is told, and it's good to know, or good to remind ourselves that this is a window of their life. It's not their whole life.
Thank you, Ross. So our last question for today for everyone is, what is one of your favorite things about your state? And we'll start again with Lily.
There is so much that I love about Alaska. It is the wilderness and the grandness and the diversity of the indigenous peoples. There's over 200 tribes in Alaska. But what I love most is our ancient stories. My father told me that we left Siberia to Alaska because we were being chased by witches. And there's an ancient story where we were caught atop this large glacier, caught in a storm, spending months on top of this glacier. And every day this man would reach up and stick his finger up the icy roof to see if the storm had passed. An elder from my village, Samaru, he told me a story where the sea level was 100 feet lower than it is today. The point of Point Hope going out another 3 miles. And we used to walk out there, and it curved around, and we go out there to gather clams. And it is, as a writer, as an Indigenous person, it is a process of validating ourselves, that that our stories have meaning and they have validity. And it's getting that those stories down on paper, which I'm advocating for, supporting our young people to explore becoming a writer. Yes, and thank you so much. It is an honor to be here.
Thank you, Lily. Honored by your presence here. Hey, Noah.
That's a big question. Mahalo, though. Hawaii is such a diverse history from our other 49 cousins, siblings, if you will. Hawaii being one of the few former kingdoms, monarchies, that's a big part of our history. But, for me, beside the beautiful white sandy beaches and, the beautiful weather that we have here in Hawaii, I think it's the ancestral wisdom and stories that have been passed down, like Lily mentioned, that are still with us today, that teach us about how to be in general, not having enough time to really dive into the specificities of it. But I think it's a very Western concept to just look forward, never look back, but a very Native perspective to look back to our past to help guide us forward. Hawaiian proverb, Ikava Mamua, Kava Mahope, looking to the past to guide us and direct us so that we can, one, not to make the mistakes potentially of the past, but to celebrate the victories of the past and moving forward, and how to, to further ourselves, and that carrying that DNA is in our, of that wisdom is in our bloodstream, is in our heart, is in our mind. And that was very prevalent here in Hawaii. Prior to Western contact, we had an oral tradition. We didn't write anything down. And my ancestors could memorize 1,000 generations of genealogy and recite it to you verbatim, passed down from father to son, mother to daughter, teacher to student for generations. And as best as we can, we're still trying to write that down, as our language has only been on paper for nearly 200 years, and trying to capture that, as our memories are not as good as our ancestors used to be. But being able to look back to the past to help guide us forward, really, for me, is something that's special here, that we still hang on to and hold dear to our hearts here in Hawaii. And then my last thought just is that the idea of aloha, that spirit, the life-giving spirit of aloha, that way of life, it's much more than a greeting for us here in Hawaii. And it's a way of life, it's a way of thinking, it's a way to connect and welcome those into your life in general. And if the world could have a little more aloha in it, we'd be all in a better place. So I think those lessons from Hawaii really help make us a very special place. Mahalo again for that question.
Oh, I mean, everything. But I think in particular, I am especially drawn to just the spirit of aloha, especially as a traveler. Like, I think so many travelers often go to Hawaii and kind of like feel this beautiful spirit, but aren't necessarily able to pinpoint what it is. It's like, oh my gosh, why is it that when I go to Hawaii, I just feel so at peace and I feel so welcomed? And it's like, there's a reason for that. And the reason is aloha. And aloha, for anybody who doesn't know, like, the word is actually broken up into two different phrases. Alo means sort of like face to face, and ha is the breath of life. And so really what aloha is, it's inviting somebody to share the breath of life with you. And it's this idea that, we're all sharing this same breath of life together. We're all connected. And so when people think of aloha as just hello and goodbye, it's actually really about sharing in this community love and this community spirit. And that's, I think, as a traveler, what you feel when you go to Hawaii. And I think it's so important also to apply that mindset to your life back at home. And I think, Kainoa and I always say, and so many Hawaiians say, like, if everybody around the world practiced more aloha, the world would definitely be a better place.
Yes, this is a beautiful question. And I want to start by saying our Nez Perce homelands include Idaho, but also Oregon, Washington, Montana. They're very vast. So in speaking about Idaho, you know, there are places in Idaho that are very precious because our creation stories being located there, and there are stories of the rocks. And, you know, we don't have a migration story. We have a story that we were created in this very space. And there's a rock that marks that. And so to be able to go there and to be in these homelands and to be sort of living in the same vibrational space, the same homelands that our ancestors have been in forever is, you know, a very precious and beautiful thing that now Idaho is part of that. So I have a lot of relatives in North Idaho and other parts of our Nez Perce homeland. I myself grew up in Southeast Idaho with my dad's family. And, you know, the one thing that connects those two spaces is the Snake River. So if I could say there's something that's very precious to me that connects my heritage across space and time, it is the Snake River.
Thank you. Zeb?
Thank you for the question. I think Nevada, I love the diversity of landscapes we have here, Lake Tahoe, the Grand Canyon, the desert springs, and all the diversity of fish that go along with that. But I also love that I feel like you can't put Nevada in a box. And so I love the diversity of people and opinions here. And the fact, for example, that one of the driest states nominated a book about the world's largest freshwater fish as their representing Nevada, and a book about a marine invertebrate as the children's book for Nevada this year. So I appreciate that diversity of thinking and outside of the box thinking in terms of what we do here in Nevada. Thank you.
Thank you. Anita?
I know a lot of people curse Oregon's rain that we have for 3/4 of the year, it feels like. But to me, there's nothing greater than standing inside the Oregon rainforest and just feel like all the trees are flappers from the 20s. Because there's moss hanging like feet long from these trees, and it's so green and verdant it almost hurts your eyes, and you reach down and you pick huckleberries, salmon berries, and all kinds of berries that you've never even heard of, marionberries, maybe not inside the rainforest, but so that to me is just kind of the quintessential beautiful sogginess of the Oregon rainforest, my favorite place to be.
Please, thank you. Frank, what's your favorite part of your state?
Well, two things, Sarah. First, I love that Seattle is a UNESCO City of Literature, one of only 2 such places in the country. And maybe it's true that the rain and coffee keep us indoors reading and writing, but there is a longstanding culture here centered around some dynamic institutions like the Seattle Public Library and readings at Elliott Bay Book Company, Third Place Books, and other indies. Strong academic press at the University of Washington. It's also a place where you can discover a boutique publisher like ours, Chin Music Press, which is nestled in the arcade below the fish tossers at Pike Place Market. Seattle is a port city, so it's a hub for Asian immigration in the last century. And so I see Seattle and Washington through the lens of such post-war Asian American writers like John Okada and Carlos Bulosan, followed by a later generation that includes Sean Wong, Frank Chin, and many others. So there's a culture here that not only accepts, but I think uplifts stories like ours. And the fact that We Hereby Refuse is selected to represent Washington State says a lot about the book people here. And we really, really need to thank the Washington Center for the Book and the Seattle Public Library for that, in particular, Stesha Brandon and Linda Johns. A Seattle City of Literature just published a literary map of Seattle. I'm pleased that it features the birthplace of the great American novelist John Okada as one of the landmarks, as well as others like Octavia Butler and Denise Levertov. Secondly, what I like about Washington State is that it's also a place for mavericks. Inside the Japanese American Citizens League, national organization, Seattle has always been known as the Maverick chapter. The gravitational center of Japanese America by sheer mass is in Southern California, but up here in our corner of the map, we enjoy I think, a relative isolation from that community pressure, and also from the East Coast centers of media and government. And I know for me, it gives me space to think creatively without regard for community disapproval. 35 years ago, Japanese Americans nationwide were struggling to make the case for redress and reparations for the wartime incarceration. And it took the Mavericks in Seattle here to kickstart the popular campaign for redress by inventing the first Day of Remembrance, which drew out 2,000 people for a massive car caravan to rally behind the cause and show the nation that we weren't afraid to stand for justice and reparation. So that's the kind of Washington State I know.
Thank you so much, Frank. Tamiko?
I will echo the number of wonderful independent bookstores that we have in Washington State, and the vibrant Asian American community, both of which have really helped to uplift and amplify the story that we tell in We Hereby Refuse. I'm also a huge fan of the color of our water and the lush greenery of our forests. And I really am so grateful to be living here. It's an adopted home state for me, but I'm very grateful to be here.
Thank you. Ross?
I'm originally from the Midwest, Wisconsin and Michigan. And I think my favorite thing about Washington is just the extremeness of it. It's got a rainforest to the left and a desert to the right, and it's got mountains and oceans and wild rivers. And outside these windows, there was a bear the other day. There's salmon in the creek about a mile away that come up to lay their eggs, and there are orcas out in the Puget Sound, and eagles and osprey and owls, and it's just an overwhelming place. So I love it.